I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I grew up in a family where traditions weren't just holiday extras, they were the heartbeat of our home. My parents made every event, from birthdays to small Sunday dinners, feel like something you carried with you forever. We had quirky rituals like hand-decorated place cards at Thanksgiving, homemade ornaments at Christmas, and a braided bread at Easter that my grandmother passed down the recipe for. Those little things shaped me. So when I got married to Adam, who is now 31, I imagined bringing that same warmth into our own home. At first, his family seemed fine, reserved, a little distant maybe, but polite. I assumed it was just a difference in how families showed affection. The first big test was Thanksgiving. I decided to host, and I went all out: roast turkey, family recipes, handwritten place cards at each seat with a personal touch. When everyone sat down, Adam's sister laughed and asked if I was playing house. I smiled and brushed it off, but the comment stung. Adam stayed quiet, busying himself with pouring drinks, and I told myself it was just a slip. Christmas came next. In my family, we always exchanged small, meaningful ornaments, something that marked the year, like a trip or an inside joke. I set up a little table where everyone could trade theirs. Adam's mother rolled her eyes and called them cheap trinkets, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Some relatives chuckled awkwardly and moved on. Later that night, I told Adam how hurt I was. He shrugged and told me to stop trying so hard. They just don't care about that stuff, he said. When Easter rolled around, I thought maybe a food tradition would be safer. I baked the braided bread that had been on my family's table for generations. Adam's father sliced into it and joked it was fancy bread for no reason. His mother smirked, and his sister chimed in about store-bought rolls being good enough for everyone else. I smiled politely, but inside I felt the familiar ache. Every effort was brushed off, not because the idea was silly, but because I cared enough to bring it forward. That's what I started to notice. They weren't laughing at the traditions themselves. They were mocking me for putting value on them. It became a pattern. Each gathering ended the same way. Me trying to introduce something heartfelt, them treating it like a performance to poke fun at. I started to pay attention, to see how intentional it was. The more personal the tradition, the harder they laughed. On our first wedding anniversary, I lit candles around the table. In my family, you light one for each year together, a quiet ritual of gratitude. As I leaned over to light the second candle, Adam's sister blew it out, laughing as if it was a harmless prank. The table laughed with her. I felt the air leave the room, but Adam just shrugged. He called his family lighthearted and told me not to take things so seriously. That was his excuse every time. But it wasn't harmless, it was a choice. And I started to feel a shift in myself. Instead of wondering how to avoid their mockery, I began thinking of ways to confront it without a fight. Not yelling, not shutting down, but showing them something they couldn't laugh off without making themselves look bad. I thought back to the nights in my parents' house where laughter and warmth weren't forced. They just happened because everyone knew the traditions meant something. Those were the moments that stuck with me, that shaped me, and I wanted to carry them forward. The more I replayed the comments, the smirk about cheap trinkets, the jab about playing house, the candle snuffed out mid-ritual, the clearer it became. They weren't just uninterested, they wanted to remind me that I didn't belong in their circle, that my contributions were ornamental at best. I decided I wouldn't let them dictate how I celebrated. If they wanted to roll their eyes, so be it. But I wasn't going to give up the parts of me that mattered. I grew more deliberate, thinking about the next holiday season, not as a chance to fit in, but as a stage where their behavior could reveal itself. It wasn't about forcing my ways on them. It was about creating space for kindness, thoughtfulness, and sincerity. If they joined in, great. If they refused, that refusal would be visible to everyone, not just me. When I looked at Adam, I saw a man torn between his family and me, but unwilling to take a stand, so I stopped waiting for him to defend me. I told myself, you don't need a defender, you need a plan. That plan started to form in the quiet moments after gatherings, when I'd replay each scene in my head. The gratitude missing from their words, the disdain in their laughs, the shallow excuses Adam fed me. Piece by piece, I built an idea of how to turn it all back on them. The next holiday would be different. I would introduce something that no one could mock without exposing exactly what they'd been doing all along. I didn't know yet what shape it would take, but I knew it would happen. Their laughter would finally echo back on them, and the family would see it for what it was. That thought stayed with me like a flicker of light at the end of a long tunnel. I had played along, absorbed the blows, and smiled through the jabs, but the next time we gathered around a table, it wouldn't be me who stood out, it would be them. I started planning for Christmas earlier that year, and this time I wasn't going to repeat the same pattern of walking in blind. I wanted something that wasn't just one of my family's traditions, but something that felt new, something that couldn't be mocked without making the mockery itself obvious. I dug through old family albums, read articles online, even looked at cultural traditions from Adam's side of the family, though his family had never practiced any of them. I scribbled down ideas in a notebook late at night, trying to find something simple enough that no one could twist it into a joke. When I brought up the idea of blending traditions to Adam, he barely looked up from his laptop. He said his family didn't do things like that. As long as there was food and drinks, they were fine. His words weren't harsh, but they left no room for enthusiasm. I didn't push further. If he didn't want to be part of the planning, I would handle it myself. The idea came to me one evening while scrolling through a photo of my parents' dining table years ago. There had been a jar on the counter, filled with folded slips of paper we'd written during the month. On New Year's Eve, we read them aloud, each one a moment of gratitude. It was simple, it was kind, and it couldn't be mocked without exposing the one mocking. That would be my way in. I told Adam I wanted to host Christmas again. He raised his eyebrows but didn't protest. I could see the hesitation in his face though. When I explained the gratitude jar, he smirked a little and warned me that his family might find it silly. He didn't forbid it. That was all I needed. Invitations went out 2 weeks before Christmas. I made it clear that our home was open, that I wanted everyone to come together in a warm and relaxed way. I didn't go over the top with my wording, just a simple note with the time, the menu, and a small reminder that the holidays were about togetherness. The preparations began quietly. I bought a large glass jar and cut pieces of cardstock into squares. Each card had a little border I'd drawn with a silver pen, nothing too fancy, just neat. I placed the jar on a small table by the front door, with pens and blank slips waiting. A handwritten sign read, "Share one kind thought about someone at the table. We'll read them after dinner." On Christmas morning, I cooked through the day. Roast beef, roasted vegetables, potatoes, pies. It was all familiar enough not to draw criticism. I decorated simply, no ornate displays, no glittering ornaments that could be dismissed as trinkets. Just a clean table, lit candles, and fresh flowers in a vase. When the family arrived, coats piled onto the guest room bed, and voices carried through the hall. Adam's mother was first to comment on the table setting, noting that I'd gone all out again. Her tone wasn't warm, but I smiled and offered her a drink. The others settled in, cousins chatting, Adam's father already cracking jokes about football. Dinner passed smoother than I expected. The roast was praised, and even Adam's father complimented the pies. His mother still couldn't resist a few digs, asking if I had spent the whole week preparing and saying I must not have time for anything else. But the mood stayed steady, everyone eating heartily, and chatting about work, kids, and the year gone by. When dessert plates were cleared, I brought the jar to the center of the table. I explained it quickly, telling them it was a lighthearted way to share positivity. Nothing serious, just one kind note for someone here. Read aloud. I watched the faces around the table. A few curious smiles, a few raised brows. Adam reached in first. He unfolded a slip and read aloud about his father's humor, how it always kept the room lively. The table chuckled. His father puffed his chest a little, and the mood lifted. Encouraged, I pulled out one of mine. It was about Adam's sister's creativity, mentioning a project she'd finished earlier that year. For a split second, she smiled, though she quickly masked it. The jar went around. Each note pulled and read. Laughter rippled as cousins received compliments about their cooking or their generosity. The notes weren't all deep, but they were kind. No one could roll their eyes without drawing attention. When Adam's mother's turn came, she hesitated. Her fingers lingered on the folded slip, longer than anyone else's. When she finally opened it, her lips tightened. She read, "Claire has made great efforts to bring everyone together this year." Her voice was flat, but the words hung heavy. The table went quiet. No one laughed. No one joked. For the first time, the kindness was directed at me, and they didn't know how to react. A silence pressed in, broken only when Adam's father cleared his throat and reached for the next slip. Slowly, the flow returned. Compliments continued, genuine or not, but no one dared slip back into mockery. By the end, the jar was empty, the notes scattered across the table. People shifted in their seats, conversations moved back to safer topics, and the evening wound down. Relatives hugged goodbye, coats were collected, cars pulled out of the driveway. As I gathered dishes in the quiet afterward, I knew the jar had done what I intended. It had forced a moment of kindness, one they couldn't mock without looking cruel. They hadn't enjoyed it, not all of them, but they had gone along. And in their compliance, they revealed how much they resented being asked to show something genuine. No one fought, no one exploded, but I could sense the storm brewing beneath the politeness. Adam's mother, especially, had been forced into a corner she didn't like. She'd push back, I was sure. This was just the first move. But for that night, I set the jar on the counter, slips still unfolded, and let the silence of the house settle around me. For once, the laughter at my expense had been replaced by something else, an awkward quiet that spoke louder than their jokes ever had. In the days after Christmas, the quiet house felt heavier than usual. Adam came into the kitchen one evening while I was loading the dishwasher and casually mentioned that his mother thought my gratitude jar had been manipulative. He didn't soften the word or try to explain it differently. He just repeated what she said, like he was passing along a message. According to her, I had forced people into pretending to be nice when they didn't want to. Adam leaned against the counter with his arms crossed and told me he agreed with her. He said I had put everyone on the spot, that the whole thing felt like I was trying to control the mood of the evening instead of letting it flow naturally. I paused with my hands in soapy water and asked him if he thought kindness needed to be forced. He didn't answer, only muttered that his family wasn't used to things like that and I should have known better. I explained to him that the jar wasn't about control. It was about sharing something positive, about reminding people to acknowledge one another. He didn't argue further but stayed defensive, repeating that his family didn't like being told what to do. He left the kitchen with the conversation unfinished, leaving me staring at the wet dishes stacked high. A few days later, Adam's sister called me. Her voice was sharper than usual, and she wasted no time telling me that the jar had been fake nice and unnecessary. She said her family didn't believe in being pushed into fake sentiment. She hung up quickly, leaving me holding the phone in silence. The strange thing was, instead of making me back down, their reactions only confirmed what I had already noticed at the table. They didn't like sincerity. They didn't like being asked to show appreciation. They didn't like it because it revealed something about them. I knew then that I wasn't going to stop. Spring rolled around and with it came Easter. I volunteered to host again, even though I could feel Adam's hesitation the moment I suggested it. I told him I wanted to keep it simple. Good food, family togetherness, and a new activity that wouldn't feel heavy. He asked me not to make them uncomfortable again. I reassured him it would be optional this time. If people wanted to join, they could. And if they didn't, that was fine. My plan was a recipe swap. Everyone had dishes they cared about, meals that meant something in their families. I thought it would be a way to share without making anyone feel singled out. I framed it as a celebration of roots, not as something sentimental. That way it could be playful, easy, and still meaningful. I spent the week preparing. On the morning of Easter, I set up a large board in the dining room with colorful cards and pens. A banner above it read, "Family Recipes to Share." Each card had space for the recipe name, a short note about why it mattered, and the contributor's name. I put some of my own as examples. My grandmother's braided bread, my father's stew. I left the rest blank, waiting for the others. When Adam's parents arrived, his mother spotted the board almost immediately. Her lips tightened and she muttered that everyone already knew what they liked to eat. She sat down heavily at the table and made no move toward the board. Adam's father, though, surprised me. He chuckled, grabbed a pen, and wrote down his barbecue marinade recipe, adding a note about how it had been the secret sauce at every summer cookout for years. He stuck the card onto the board with a grin. The cousins soon followed. One scribbled down a cookie recipe she said her kids begged for every week. Another added her mother's potato salad recipe, decorated with a doodle of a bowl. Before long, the board started to fill with cards, colorful and messy, but alive with everyone's contributions. Adam's mother and sister sat stiffly at the table, watching. They didn't write anything. They didn't even glance at the pens. Their refusal was louder than words, because while everyone else laughed and swapped stories about burnt casseroles and failed pies, their silence became its own contribution. Adam's father walked past the board later in the afternoon, patting the card he'd put up and pointing it out to one of the cousins. "Best marinade you'll ever taste," he said proudly, and several people nodded along. Laughter rippled through the room as people traded stories about when they'd first tried certain recipes. By the end of the day, the board was nearly full. Each card was pinned proudly, some with smudges from hurried hands, others with neat cursive writing. I stepped back and looked at it while people gathered coats and hugged goodbye. The board had become a patchwork of family voices, each one written down and shared. But 2 spaces stayed empty. Adam's mother and sister never touched a pen, never walked near the board. Their absence stood out like a hole in the pattern. Everyone else had added something, no matter how small. Their refusal wasn't private, it was visible to the entire family. When the last guests left, Adam helped me clear plates. He didn't say much, but I caught him glancing at the board. His father's card was right in the center, bold and proud. His mother's silence right beside it was even louder. That Easter marked something important. The recipe swap wasn't just an activity, it was a mirror. The family saw who contributed and who didn't. They saw who joined in and who refused. And for the first time, it wasn't me who looked out of place. After Easter, the tension didn't fade. Adam's mother found new ways to bring it up, usually through him. She complained that I was reshaping the family, making everything about me, and trying to control how holidays looked. Adam passed along her words like he didn't want to take a side, but the message was clear, she wasn't letting it go. One night after dinner, Adam asked me if I could tone it down at the next gathering. He said he felt caught between me and his mother, and didn't want another fight. I reminded him that plenty of people had loved the recipe swap, that his father had proudly shared his marinade recipe, and that the cousins had added cards with excitement. It wasn't about me controlling anything, it was about people finally enjoying these gatherings. Adam didn't argue, but I could see the exhaustion on his face. The next big family event came sooner than I expected. Adam's father had a birthday, and the whole family went out to a restaurant to celebrate. It was a casual place with long wooden tables and the kind of menu where everyone found something familiar. I decided to bring something small, not over the top, just thoughtful. I had taken his barbecue marinade recipe from Easter, written it neatly on decorative paper, and framed it. I wrapped it in plain brown paper and carried it into the restaurant with me. When the cake was finished and the table buzzed with chatter, I slid the package across to Adam's father. He opened it, pulled out the frame, and stared at it for a moment before smiling broadly. He held it up for the table to see and thanked me out loud, saying it was one of the most thoughtful gifts he'd gotten. Relatives clapped and laughed, and a cousin leaned over to say I always added something meaningful. But not everyone was smiling. Adam's mother's face stiffened, and his sister leaned in to whisper something in her ear. Their eyes darted toward me with disapproval, as if I'd committed an offense instead of giving a gift. A few minutes later, Adam's mother muttered under her breath about me making everything a performance. The comment wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough for me to catch. I didn't react, but I noticed the pattern. Every time I offered something genuine, their hostility became more obvious. It wasn't about the act itself, it was about the spotlight shifting away from them. That realization stayed with me through the rest of the dinner, even as Adam's father kept propping the frame against his glass to admire it. On the way home, I started thinking ahead. The next big holiday would be Thanksgiving, months away, but I knew I wanted to plan carefully. I didn't want another jar or recipe board. I wanted something different, something that encouraged everyone to join but left no room to dismiss it as fake. I came up with the idea of a family gratitude photo album. Each person would bring a photo of a memory with the family and write a short note about why it mattered. Over time, it could become a book of memories, something passed around at future gatherings. It wasn't sentimental fluff, it was concrete, visual, and personal. I went shopping one weekend and bought a large scrapbook with clear photo slots. I picked out decorative pens, glue sticks, and small embellishments that could be added around the photos. Everything was ready months before Thanksgiving, tucked neatly into a bag in my closet. When I told Adam about the plan, he let out a long sigh. He didn't fight me, but he warned that I was poking the bear by introducing yet another activity. I told him I wasn't asking for permission. This wasn't about forcing anyone to join. Whoever wanted to add something could, and whoever didn't would make their choice obvious. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but he didn't press further. For me, the decision was already made. The book would be brought out at Thanksgiving, and the family would be faced with another choice: join in, or let their silence be seen. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just introducing traditions. I was pulling back a curtain. Every note, every recipe, every framed card, every photograph, it all showed who wanted to build something together and who wanted to tear it down. I didn't need to expose them myself. They were exposing themselves. Word count: Nehemiah 100,005. Thanksgiving came with the smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon pies, and chatter filling the air even before everyone arrived. I had been up since dawn, setting the table, polishing glasses, and making sure every detail was in place. At the entrance, on a side table decorated with autumn leaves, sat the scrapbook. Pens, glue sticks, and little decorative stickers surrounded it, along with a stack of blank cards where people could write notes if they didn't have a photo ready. The book was open to the first page, where I had pasted a picture of Adam and me from our wedding, with a short note about how that day had started our family traditions together. As relatives began to walk in, coats draped over arms and kids running ahead, their eyes landed on the scrapbook almost instantly. Adam's father was the first to ask how it worked. I explained that everyone could add a photo of a memory and write a small note about why it mattered. Cousins leaned in, curious, flipping through the blank pages. Their excitement was immediate, their questions rapid. Could they add more than one? Could they decorate the page? Could they tell a funny memory instead of a serious one? I nodded yes to all of it. Soon, laughter echoed through the hallway as cousins dug through purses and phones, pulling out printed photos they had tucked away for the day. One cousin pasted a snapshot from a summer beach trip, scribbling underneath about how it had been the funniest weekend they'd ever had. Another added a picture of a childhood birthday party, pointing at frosting smeared across faces in the photo and laughing until tears welled in her eyes. The energy was infectious. Guests crowded around the table, stickers and pens passing hand to hand, voices rising as they reminisced. Even Adam's father joined in, pulling a photo of him and his brothers grilling at a family barbecue years ago. He wrote beneath it about how those summer afternoons had always been his favorite, drawing smiles and nods from everyone who remembered. Not everyone was joining, though. Adam's mother stood near the living room, arms crossed, lips pursed. She muttered the words childish scrapbooking just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Adam's sister sat stiffly beside her, shaking her head when I offered her one of the blank cards. She claimed she hadn't brought a photo, even when I pointed to the pile of cards for writing memories instead. She turned her face away, her refusal silent but firm. Their lack of effort stood out more as the pages filled. Every blank they left made the rest of the album feel fuller, more alive. Their absence was obvious, and for once, it wasn't me who looked like the odd one out. Relatives noticed too, casting small glances toward them while continuing to chat and share stories at the scrapbook table. As the day went on, the energy from the album carried into the dining room. People swapped stories over turkey and stuffing, referencing the photos they had added earlier. Conversations were light, easy, and for the first time in a long while, the mood at a family holiday didn't feel weighed down. Then Adam's father opened the album again after dessert and read his page aloud. He pointed to the photo of him at the grill, recalling the smell of smoke and the sound of laughter from those afternoons. His words drew smiles from every corner of the table. The album moved from hand to hand, each person flipping through and laughing softly as they recognized memories. But the peace broke suddenly. Adam's mother's voice cut through the warmth, sharp and loud. She snapped that I was trying to control the family story, that I was rewriting their past and forcing everyone to remember things my way. The room froze. Forks clinked down onto plates. No one laughed. No one moved. Her words didn't sound protective. They sounded spiteful. For a long moment, silence filled the dining room. All eyes turned toward her. It was Adam's cousin who finally broke it. She spoke calmly, saying that the scrapbook wasn't controlling anything, that it was the first time in years the family had been able to sit together and actually enjoy each other's company. Several heads nodded in agreement, quiet murmurs of support passing around the table. Adam's mother and sister pushed back their chairs, almost in unison. They withdrew into the corner of the room, arms folded tightly, faces hard. They didn't speak again for the rest of the evening, but the rest of the family stayed engaged, lingering over the scrapbook, flipping through the pages again, adding stickers to corners of photos, and laughing softly at old memories. For the first time, their mockery didn't land. The cousins didn't laugh along. Adam's father didn't excuse it. Instead, the contrast between the scrapbook table and the stiff figures in the corner spoke volumes. By the time the night ended, relatives hugged me at the door, thanking me for putting together something that felt real, something that brought them closer. The scrapbook lay on the table, now half filled with photos, doodles, and notes. Adam carried it to the kitchen and set it carefully on the counter. The divide in the family was now clear, and it wasn't centered on me, it was centered on the people who refused to join in. The weeks after Thanksgiving were different from the ones before it. For once, I wasn't the subject of every side conversation. Instead, people were talking about the scrapbook. Cousins texted me pictures of the pages they had made, saying they wanted to add more next year. Adam's father called one evening just to tell me again how much he liked seeing everyone share their memories. The divide in the family was noticeable. Most of the relatives were clearly on my side, while Adam's mother and sister stayed distant, making excuses to avoid casual get-togethers. Then one night, Adam's phone rang. His mother had called him privately. I heard her voice sharp through the speaker, even though Adam had stepped into the hall. She accused me of trying to take attention in the family, and of pushing her aside. Adam came back into the room afterward with his forehead creased. He asked me if I could ease up, if I could let his mom take the lead for once. I set down the dish towel in my hands and told him plainly that I wasn't taking over anything. I wasn't trying to be in charge. I was only contributing, the same way anyone else could. If his mother wanted to lead, nothing was stopping her. The difference was that I was stepping up where she wasn't. Adam didn't argue, but his silence said plenty. When December arrived, I started planning again. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday, and I wanted to bring something that encouraged connection without forcing anyone to be too sentimental. I designed a new tradition I called the Secret Helper game. A week before Christmas, I mailed envelopes to each household. Inside was a slip of paper with the name of another family member. The instructions were simple. Do one small, kind thing for that person during Christmas dinner. Nothing big, nothing expensive, just a small act of thoughtfulness. Adam was nervous when he saw the envelopes stacked by the door. He asked me if this was going to stir things up again. I reminded him that the gratitude jar had worked, that the scrapbook had brought people together, and that each time his family ended up showing more of themselves than they realized. This would be the same. After a moment, he admitted the gatherings had improved because of my ideas, even if he still worried about his mother's reaction. On Christmas Day, the house filled with voices, footsteps, and the smell of roasted ham and cinnamon rolls. I kept the decorations minimal this time. Just soft lights on the tree, a plain centerpiece on the table, and no elaborate displays that could be mocked. The focus was on the game. Dinner went smoothly, plates passed around, glasses clinking, cousins telling stories about work and kids. After dessert, I brought out the stack of envelopes again and reminded everyone of the game. One by one, people started to share. A cousin laughed as he explained how his chair had been pulled out for him all evening without him noticing who did it. Another grinned, pointing at the cousin beside her, and said she'd found her drink magically refilled every time it got low. A niece piped up that someone had slipped an extra dessert onto her plate when she wasn't looking. Laughter spread around the table as each person revealed their helper moment, some obvious, some subtle, all playful and kind. The atmosphere shifted into joy. People teased each other lightly, pointing out who must have been whose helper, laughing at how small gestures had gone unnoticed until now. It was the kind of energy I had wanted from the start. Light, fun, and genuine. But when the circle reached Adam's mother, the tone broke. She sat with her hands folded, lips pressed tight. When asked, she had nothing to share. She hadn't poured a drink, pulled out a chair, or done a single small act. The silence stretched as eyes turned toward her. It was uncomfortable, heavy, and impossible to hide. Adam's sister spoke up quickly, trying to cover the gap. She said she must have done something but couldn't remember what it was. Her words fell flat. People exchanged glances, their doubt clear. Compared to the detailed stories everyone else shared, her vague excuse looked weak. The game ended without confrontation, but the contrast was obvious. Everyone else had joined in, even if their acts were small or silly. The only people left out were Adam's mother and sister, and this time, they had no one else to blame. Their refusal wasn't painted as independence. It was seen as unwillingness to participate in something that made everyone else smile. As coats were gathered and cars started in the driveway, cousins hugged me and said it had been one of the most fun Christmas dinners in years. Adam's father clapped me on the shoulder and laughed about how clever the secret helper idea had been. The scrapbook from Thanksgiving still sat on the side table, and several guests paused to flip through it one more time before leaving. When the house finally quieted, I cleared dishes from the table and looked at the empty chairs. For once, it wasn't me who stood apart from the family. It was them. After Christmas, the secret helper game became the main topic of family chatter. Cousins texted stories about how clever some of the tricks had been, replaying the laughter from that night. One cousin even joked that they should do it every year. The house felt lighter, but Adam warned me that his mother wouldn't let it slide. He said she had been unusually quiet after everyone left, and in his family, silence was never a good sign. Within a week, word got back to me through Adam that his mother had been telling relatives she felt I was turning holidays into gimmicks. She told them traditions should be natural, not games forced on people. But this time, instead of agreeing, a few relatives pushed back. They told her that the gatherings had finally started to feel warm and welcoming again, that they actually looked forward to them now. Adam admitted he hadn't expected anyone to defend me, but clearly the tide was shifting. The split became more obvious. Cousins began inviting me directly to smaller get-togethers, like a casual Sunday barbecue or a baby shower, without going through Adam. They included me in group messages, asking if I could bring more of my braided bread or one of my dessert recipes. Adam's father continued to call, sometimes just to talk about a new marinade idea or to tell me about a tool he used for grilling. In contrast, his mother and sister grew more distant. They stayed polite in public, but it was the kind of politeness that kept me at arm's length. The tension showed itself again at a cousin's birthday dinner in February. It was a restaurant party with long tables, balloons tied to chairs, and cake boxes stacked near the entrance. Midway through the meal, Adam's mother made a remark about how real traditions didn't need jars or scrapbooks or games. She said people should just show up, eat, and enjoy themselves. I didn't respond, but her words hung in the air. A cousin across the table spoke up and said that what I had done made gatherings memorable again, and that the scrapbook was one of the best things they'd had in years. Several people nodded. Adam's father chimed in too. He leaned forward and mentioned how he still kept the framed recipe card I had given him on his kitchen counter. He said it reminded him of the Easter recipe swap and how fun it had been. His words drew smiles from the table, but I caught the way his wife's expression tightened as she looked down at her plate. Later that night, while we drove home, Adam admitted he didn't know what to do anymore. He said he could see how much people liked what I was bringing, but he wasn't sure his mother would ever stop seeing it as an attack. I told him I wasn't competing with her. I was only trying to create connections, and it was up to her whether she wanted to be part of it. He stayed quiet, staring out the window, but he didn't argue. By spring, the divide was no longer hidden. At one gathering, cousins asked me directly what I was planning for the next holiday. Their curiosity came with genuine excitement, like they were expecting something to look forward to. Adam's mother overheard the question and grew visibly irritated. She didn't say anything in front of everyone, but her stiff posture gave her away. I noticed her and Adam's sister whispering together more often. They'd lean in close at the edges of family gatherings, their eyes flicking toward me, then darting away when I caught them. It wasn't subtle, and it didn't go unnoticed. Relatives glanced at them but stayed focused on the activities I brought. Their exclusion was becoming clearer by the day. Despite the tension, I kept planning. I thought carefully about the next tradition. It had to be something no one could dismiss as childish or manipulative, something so unshakable that refusing it would say more about them than it ever could about me. I began drafting ideas in a small notebook I kept tucked in the kitchen drawer, lists of activities, ways to involve everyone, and how to make it easy for people to participate. At one family dinner, Adam's father asked me if I was bringing the scrapbook again for the next gathering. His words were casual, but they lit up the table. Several relatives joined in, saying they hoped to add more photos and stories. The excitement spread, and I saw Adam's mother's jaw tighten again. She folded her arms and looked away, her irritation clear even without words. By then I realized I didn't need to defend myself anymore. Their resistance was already standing out. Every new tradition I introduced drew more people in, and every refusal from them made the gap more visible. They were isolating themselves without me having to lift a finger. Still, I knew I couldn't rely only on what I had done before. The next step had to be stronger, something that turned the split into a spotlight, something that either pulled them in or left them standing apart in full view of everyone else. As I closed my notebook one evening after jotting down more ideas, I felt certain of one thing. The next gathering wasn't just another holiday. It was going to be the moment where everything shifted. Whether they joined in or refused again, their choice would define them in front of the entire family. And this time, it wouldn't be me under the microscope. It would be them,